Hi folks, welcome back. I'm going to start out sitting down this time rather than walking around, probably making some of you dizzy. Today, let me start off by saying this. I hope you're enjoying the class so far. I hope you don't find it too challenging. It's supposed to be a one-on-one class. It's supposed to be arguably fun to a degree. I want you guys to learn some things, experience some things. So far, I've been really impressed with the posts that people have been making. Some of your examples are fantastic. They really get you thinking, and that's great. And I see there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of people talking, a lot of things that people have in common, which is wonderful too. In online classes, sometimes it's a challenge to create sort of like a community of students. And that's one of the reasons I want you guys to respond to each other and talk to each other. And oftentimes what you'll find is you get these sort of online conversations going as you move through the material. And that's fantastic. That's really what I'm interested in. I want you to enjoy this. I don't want it to be something you dread. I want it to be something you're like, well, I have to do it, but I'll still enjoy myself along the way. So I hope that's the case. I suspect many of you guys are doing just fine and you're pretty happy with the way things are. I know the grades are pretty good and they should stay pretty good. I don't see any reason why, if you just follow the directions and do the material on time, everything will be great. But anyway, this discussion board that's coming up in this lesson is specifically about the sociological concept referred to as identity. Now, I know many of you guys have heard that term. It's not a word that you're not unfamiliar with. A lot of times we think of an identity as sort of like maybe associated with like an identification, right? Or you're like, I have an ID in my pocket. It tells people something about me. It tells people something about my weight, my height, my eye color, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about to some degree, but that's a different kind of identity. But the one thing it does from a social perspective, right, from a sociological perspective, is it tells some people something about you in terms of who you are socially and culturally, i.e. you're a citizen of the state of Arizona, for example, if you have an Arizona driver's license, and you're also a citizen of the United States, right? And so from that, we can draw certain things, certain ideas about your identity. If you were to present that identification to somebody, we could say, oh, so they live in Arizona, so they must be familiar with a dry heat, right? Or they live in America, so they must understand and appreciate democracy, right? We can draw some conclusions from those sorts of things. But that's an example of an identity that you don't really have any control over. You were born here, okay? You were born in the United States, or maybe you're a naturalized citizen or something to that effect. But either way, that probably wasn't a decision you made. It may have been, but more than likely, like most people, right? You're born where you are, and you don't have any choice. You didn't choose to be an Arizonian. Like for me, my parents moved out here when I was real little. I was actually born in Milwaukee. I didn't have any choice over that, right? So, but I do have a dual identity in that case. I associate myself with Milwaukee and Wisconsin and like the Green Bay Packers and the Milwaukee Brewers at the same time that I associate myself with Arizona because it's where I spent most of my life. So I'm an Arizona Cardinals fan, a Phoenix Suns fan, a Diamondbacks fan, etc., right? I really like sports. But nonetheless, that's kind of the essence of what we're talking about here with the sociological identity. And identity in this case is how do you present yourself to other people? What do you want them to know about you? What do you want them to think about you? These are things that at any given time, you have a myriad of identities, a number of identities that are sort of circulating within you as an individual in terms of what you're going to put out there in certain social situations, right? If you're at work, you're a different person. You assume a different identity than when you're at school or with your friends or with your family. We typically do that as a way to sort of negotiate those sorts of things, right? Like if you're friends with your friends, you're not talking workshop probably or stuff about your work, maybe, but probably not as much because they might get really annoyed because they don't care or they don't want to hear about it, right? So those sorts of things. But we have a lot of identities. Everybody has a multiple identities. For example, you're a citizen of a country, you're a citizen of the state, you may be a son or a daughter. Well, you probably are, right? You probably have parents. You may be a brother or a sister, right? Maybe you're a cousin, maybe you're a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, whatever the case may be, right? We have these identities. And part of that is understanding how we put it out to the other people and how we perform that identity, how we tell people that this is who we are. And for the most part, as social beings, what we tend to do is we tend to play up those identities that we want people to know about, and we tend to play down those that we're not too concerned about or that we don't really appreciate or we don't want other people to know. For example, lots of times when people have parents that maybe are divorced or something like that, you don't tend to talk about those sorts of things. It may have been a trying time in your life or you feel like there's a social stigma attached to it, and to some degree there is in our culture, and depending upon another type of subculture, religious culture or something you might be a part of, it might even be maybe more prevalent. So you don't talk about it, right? You play down that identity or something to that effect. But nonetheless, right? So we have these competing identities and they emerge based on the social situation, who you're talking to, who you're interacting with. Think of it this way. If you're out somewhere and you're introduced to somebody for the first time, what do you tell them about yourself? For the most part, I mean, there's some pretty common things that we'll talk about, right? Like, I think for the most part, when we introduce ourselves to somebody, we talk about, obviously we tell them our name, right? Because that means something. A lot of times we talk about like what our work, like, because that's the questions we ask, right? When you meet somebody, like, so, Joe, what do you do for a living, right? That's the question you would ask. And this question you would get asked, right? These are very common things. So work, do you go to school, right? So one part of your identity might be, well, I'm a college student, or some of you are high school students. I'm a college student, I'm a high school student. If I'm a high school student, I go to this high school. If I'm a college student, I'm taking a class at Chandler Gilbert Community College, and I want to attend ASU in the fall, right? Those are part of your identities. It's who you are, and it's what you tell people. It's what you put out there for them, right? So this should be something that that you're not unfamiliar with. You probably just never thought about it in these terms. But when we meet people, we tell them certain things, right? Where we work, where we go to school, or if we go to school, we'll tell them something about our family relationship, right? This is a symbol of my relationship, right? That I'm married. So you might say, well, I have a boyfriend or girlfriend, I have kids, I have a wife, I live here, I live there, right? We communicate certain things about ourselves, and that's the notion of identity. But that's in such a situation, right? When you're introduced to somebody for the first time. Sort of as a general characteristic or idea, understanding of how we do this on a daily basis, we construct identities for ourselves, and some of them are ongoing, some of them are contextual. But for example, if you were going to construct an identity for yourself based on your work, a lot of times we're going to adopt certain signs and symbols, right? We're going to do certain things that associate ourselves with that particular profession that we're a part of, and that communicates to people that this is who I am, right? And you're putting it out there for them to know. For example, me as a college professor, right? You're probably looking at me right now, you're like, wow, this guy's pretty casual. Well, yeah, because it's summer and it's 115 degrees outside. So I really, really don't want to wear, right now in the middle of the day when I'm filming these things, I really don't want to wear what I would normally wear in front of a classroom. And if this was an in-person class, I'd actually be wearing a shirt and tie, probably some dress pants and a sport coat. Now, you might say, well, why the hell would you do that? Because you don't need to do that. You don't need to dress up. Probably have a lot of professors that are very casual on a daily basis. Well, that's part of the way I construct the identity of a professor for myself. I put it out there for people. Because then when people see me wearing these sorts of things, they tend to ask me certain questions like, what do you do for a living? In some ways, being a sociologist, I know this, that when I go certain places, I'm wearing a shirt and tie and a sport coat, people treat you with more respect. They treat you differently. They get out of your way. They hold open doors for you. They help you. They serve you faster depending upon where you're going. There's some understanding or recognition, this is a social symbol, that this is meaningful. So me as a professor, right? I want to put that out there. I want people to know that. I'm very proud of that accomplishment. That took a lot of education to get to where I'm at. I put a lot of time, a lot of dedication, a lot of hours. I want people to know that. So I have no qualms whatsoever about putting it out there for people to know. Now, you might have a job, say you work at Burger King or something. You're like, I'd rather people not know about that. So you probably don't play that up too much, right? You probably don't wear your Burger King uniform out like on a Saturday night. You're like, hey, I'm going to go on a date, so I'm going to put on my Burger King hat, right? Like, that'd be cool, right? Like, no, because it doesn't have that much meaning to you probably. Maybe you are really, really proud of that. I don't know. But for me, like part of the identity that I construct when I'm out in public is the identity of professor. I think you can know and understand that, right? And to some degree, it mirrors what the expectations of a society are. Because if you were thinking, if I were to ask you in general, or if somebody were to ask you and say, how does a college professor dress? You would probably say shirt, tie, sport coat, right? We maybe even have some assumptions about that that are even deeper than that, like a tweed sport coat with leather patches, and he wears glasses and he smokes a pipe, right? There's these sorts of things we get a lot of times from media and pop culture that kind of inform our understanding of what this means when we see it. That's how we recognize college professor. I embody that to some degree, purposefully, deliberately. I play that up. I want people to see that. I want people to know that. And for part of me, it's a sense of pride and it's a sense of accomplishment. I'll give you another example. My wife, her name is Mary. My wife's name. So Mary, she considers herself to be very much an outdoorsy person. She likes outdoor stuff. Like every year, her family takes a trip to Moab, Utah. I don't know if you know where that's at. It's on the, I guess, sort of the eastern side of the border of Utah. It's well known for its jeeping trails and its bike trails and things like that. And the Colorado River runs through there, so you can go kayaking and things like that. And I go with her, and it's not my thing; it's her thing. But I go with her, and it's a lot of fun. We go jeeping, and you drive miles back into the wilderness, and it's fun. It's really interesting. It's a great time. But that's part of her outdoor identity, right? Doing those sorts of things. But in addition to that, on an everyday basis, because obviously that's only communicating or showing that identity to people that are there, people that are present, or people that she tells, hey, I'm going to Moab, that know what that is, right? Or even if she explains it to them, then maybe they understand. And from that, they glean something about her. She's putting out there the fact that she's an outdoors person, and they can get that from it. But on an everyday level, where she's not talking to people, one of the things she does to create this identity, and she'd probably kill me if she knew I was telling you this too, because I'm kind of being a little critical, but she's not here right now, so I don't have to whisper. She likes to think she's an outdoor person, so she puts a kayak rack on her car. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The beams that go across. Because she likes to kayak. Now, truth be told, she hasn't been kayaking in like 3 years, but that's a whole nother story, right? But she wants people to know and think that she likes to kayak. So she has a kayak rack. In our garage, we have a kayak, and it stands up in our garage, and it's there for everybody to see. So anybody walking by, driving by, whatever, outside their house, that happens to look in our garage at any given time the garage door opens, is going to see a kayak. So the assumption they're going to make about some individual that lives there, my wife, if they see her getting in the car with a kayak rack, is that she likes to kayak. She's an outdoor person. That probably makes a lot of sense to you, because you probably do the same thing. Probably not outdoorsy, maybe not, but with other things. Like, for example, you like to work out at the gym, you probably wear clothes, workout clothes, right? If you do yoga, you might wear yoga pants different places, right? These are sorts of things that we can do publicly. If you're a professor, you wear a shirt and tie, right? If you're a baseball player, maybe you wear a baseball cap everywhere you go. If you really like football, you wear an Arizona Cardinals shirt or jersey when you go out places, right? These are the things we do to construct identity. In my wife's case, she has a kayak rack, we have a kayak, she has a mountain bike, a Trek mountain bike. It's like $1,000. She's never ridden it. But that brings us to another point, and we'll get there in a minute, about identities don't have to be true or valid. It's what we put out there, what we want people to think, not necessarily what we actually do or who we actually are. But she has a kayak rack, she has a mountain bike, she has skis. Yeah, skis. Right? And as far as I know that she's ever actually been skiing. But if you look in our garage, there's snow skis and ski poles. Right? But hey, people see that are going to say, she's an outdoor person. Now, the truth is, she actually gets sunstroke very quickly. She's not good outdoors at all. She gets tires out really easily. She gets sunstroke really easily. It has to be a certain temperature, certain conditions, or else she's going to be like, ugh, this sucks. Mosquitoes devour her everywhere she goes. So I have no idea how she ever put this identity together. But nonetheless, it's what she wants people to think. Now, I love her to death, don't get me wrong, and I think it's funny, and I never say these things to her face because, God help me, she would freak out, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that she constructs this identity. She puts it out there for people. She has signs and symbols that we would associate with being an outdoors person, loving the outdoors, that she communicates to people. She talks about it. If people ask her what her hobbies are, she says, I like to kayak. I like to mountain bike. Not that she's ever been mountain biking, but that doesn't matter because they probably don't know that. They just see what's around her and they believe it and they accept her identity that she's putting out there. And you guys probably know some people like that. In fact, you may be somebody like that puts something out there that may or may not be true. And that's the thing with an identity. It doesn't have to be true. It's what we want people to think. I'll give you another example of that. I had a friend, he went to the U of A, right? So there's a problem right there. He went to U of A, not ASU. But that's another story. But he was never a very big sports person. But when he went to U of A, obviously U of A has a really good basketball team. And for a few years, they had a really good football team. The football team's doing okay right now. But they have a really good basketball team. So when you go down to U of A, you got to be kind of a basketball fan. It's part of the culture down there. Like ASU, football is more important than basketball because they don't have a very good basketball team. But it's part of the culture. So he would go down there and he would talk about the games and stuff. So then when he would come up to hang out with me and my other friends, he would talk basketball all the time. Now the thing was, he didn't know anything about basketball. This was just stuff he was picking up when he was down there. But it comes down to is he was trying to construct an identity for himself as a basketball fan, even though he didn't know anything about basketball. So he was learning it on the fly. So he would say things, do things, wear things to try to communicate, hey, look, I like basketball, specifically U of A basketball. But then we'd be sitting around watching a basketball game and he would say really weird things, call fouls that weren't fouls, use terminology that didn't fit the game, like, wow, that was a heck of a pass. And you'd be like, yeah, that was a great pass. And he'd be like, what's the term for that? And I'd be like, an assist? And he'd be like, oh yeah, right. Oh yeah, that's what I meant to say, right? Stuff like that. Maybe you know some people that do those sorts of things. If you watch football, right, they're like, basket, or they watch a basketball, they're like, touchdown, right? And you're like, what are you talking about? Okay, he was that sort of guy. I remember very specifically once being out with him at a sports bar watching a football game, and he got really, really excited when they showed a replay. And he was like, oh my God, they scored this twice in like 2 minutes. And I was like, yeah, that was a replay of the play before. And he went crazy in his bar and everybody's looking at it. It was hilarious. But it exposed him as somewhat of a fraud, right? And he's my best friend. He's the best man at my wedding. So don't get me wrong. Again, I'm not being critical and saying he's a bad person. I'm saying we all do this to some degree. We construct these identities for ourselves that may or may not actually fit. But it's what we want people to think about us. It's what we want people to know about us. It's what we want people to consider about us. And that's what he was doing. He wanted to be a U of A fan, so he tried to be a U of A fan. And to be fair, nowadays he talks shop, talks basketball, and he can talk the talk because he's learned it over the years, right? So this identity now seems more natural than it was when he was actually first trying to do this sort of thing. Just like my wife knows where all the good kayaking places are to go in Arizona, even though she never goes, right? But nonetheless, right? So those are some good examples of things that people do and the way these kind of go down. Like I said, you may do these sorts of things that you sort of know about something that some people that do these things. Think about the person that you know that really, really spends a lot of time talking about something but never actually does it, or they spend a lot of time talking about something and they talk about it all wrong, or they spend a lot of time talking about something they're going to do, but you know that they're never actually going to get around to doing it, right? These kinds of things come up all the time. It's part of being social beings. We interact with each other, we tell each other stories, we make things up. We want people to think something about us. And oftentimes our identities tell people somewhere about where we fit in the social hierarchy too. That's why one of the reasons we identify ourselves by job and work and school, because it tells somebody about us that, hey, I have this level of education, I make this kind of money, right? These are things we communicate to people because that's what's important in our culture. So that's what we say, right? But nonetheless, right? So this is what I'm going to be asking you guys to do in the next discussion board. Is going to be asking you to tell me about some identities that you created for yourself. They can be false identities, like ones I was talking about. They can be true ones, like what I do with being a professor. And like, mind you, I do that deliberately. There's nothing wrong with that. People know I do it, obviously, and I have no qualms about saying I do it because I take pride in what I do. So you can use examples like that, or you can talk about some things maybe that you got called out on, right? Because people questioned your legitimacy as that person. Or it can be more benign things, everyday things, who you are as a mother, as a father. How do you construct this identity? And I mean this from a public sense. Like, how do you communicate this to other people? Not how do you do it. Like, if you're a mother or father and you say, oh, I love my kids. Well, no kidding, right? I've got to hope that's true, right? But that's not what you're putting out there for people to see. But when you're out in public, what kind of things do you do that tells people that you're a father or you're your mother? Because you carry a diaper bag, right? Because you maybe you push a stroller, right? All these things communicate that sort of thing. If you're a sports fan, right? I talked about wearing the different clothing, those sorts of things, right? I'll give you another example, right? As a professor, people expect me to be smart. So one of the things that I do, and this is a part of something I'd love long before you get a professor, but I have a lot of books in my house. People expect that. When I have visitors, they're like, oh yeah, lots of books. Because you're a professor. And I say, oh yeah, of course. This is not true. I had those books before I became a professor, but there's an assumption that that's what they're going to see. I have a lot of art in my house. Oh, you have a lot of art because you're smart and you know these things. Or people expect me to talk smart when I'm out places. I don't know what talk smart means, but they expect me to use big words and say smart things. Oh, when I play Jeopardy, I rule at Jeopardy. And people are like, professor, right? Those are the kinds of things that construct a public identity for myself as professor. So those sort of things. I'll give you another example too. This was something that just happened to me just recently. My wife and I went on a trip to Atlanta. We got back Memorial Day. And on the way there, flying to Atlanta, I sat at the window seat. I paid to upgrade so I could board quicker. My wife sat next to me in the middle. So there's one empty seat at Southwest flight on the aisle. And some guy sits next to us, and he's traveling with his wife, and she sits across the aisle from him. And immediately he starts talking about this stuff associated with him being a pilot. And he's like, I'm a former pilot. I used to fly for Delta or something, or United Airlines or something. And he's telling stories. And he's telling my wife all this stuff. And I'm just ignoring him because, I don't care. I don't know you. But he's telling my wife all this stuff. And it immediately occurred to me as a sociologist that he was trying to construct an identity for my wife. He was trying to tell her that I'm a pilot because he's invested in that somehow. He's proud of that legacy. But he's retired, so he can't very well walk onto the plane wearing a pilot's uniform. There would be a problem with that. So the only way he can construct this identity publicly is to tell people about it, to make sure they know. So he's telling a complete stranger about his legacy as a pilot, up to and including, and I kid you not, he pulled out a stack of photographs of him in his pilot's uniform doing pilot things. Now, my wife, being the polite person she was, talked to him and humored him until at some point she put her earbuds in and pretended to take a nap, right? I kind of laughed and just ignored him, but that was very extreme in his efforts to communicate to us that, look, I'm a pilot. It's who I am. Not that we cared anyway, but it was very, very important to him that we knew that we knew that about him. It's up to the point where he carried around photographs, right? That's kind of weird. But again, maybe you do that, right? Maybe you wear things or do things, or you know people that wear things or do things or say things or act in certain ways. And you can use those as examples too. If you have a friend that does this or something to that effect, you can do that as well. Because I just want you to understand what it means about constructing identity publicly and putting it out there. So if you have a friend that does stuff like that that's over the top, like maybe they're really invested into their job, and so they talk nonstop about this, and because they want people to know they work there or something to that effect, right? That's fair game as well. Those kinds of things. That's what I want you guys to do. Anyway, so what I want you guys to do, and I'll have a written description of this as well. There's a video I want you to watch. It's called Zimbardo Stanford Prison Experiment. It's about 30 minutes long. It's really interesting. And I walked you through it pretty quick, but you'll get some examples of this too. The way people construct an identity that's not on purpose necessarily, right? For example, I'm a father, but I can't leave that identity of a father behind, no matter what happens. Even if my child were to move away or something, I'm still a father. It's still part of who I am. I'm a husband, right? I'm a brother. I can't do anything about that. Even if my sisters, no, I don't even like to say it, but even if they were to pass away, I'm still a brother, right? I still have sisters. So there's certain identities we can't do anything about, but it's the ones that we construct for ourselves because we want people to see us a certain way. Those are the ones I really want you to focus on, okay? Those are the ones I want you to really harp on and talk about. And I want you guys to give me some good examples. And the Zimbardo thing talks about some of this stuff where these people were put into a position as jobs, and they went from being like college students to be either guards or prisoners, and they embody these identities in some ways. They start using the signs and symbols and the language and the stuff that goes along with this. And that's the kind of thing that I want you to pay attention to, because it'll help you understand a little bit what I'm asking you to do. So that this video will probably get you where you need to be. But anyway, I think I'm asking for I have to go back and read what I wrote, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 examples. And again, they can be either you or people that you know. And I want some certain criteria that you'll be written down that you can look at, but sort of the same kind of things, the examples I just gave you here, right? With me as a professor, my wife is an outdoors person, that dude is a pilot, right? He's probably on a flight somewhere right now showing people pictures of himself, right? Kind of weird, but hey, that's what we do, right? Some of us, things are very important to us. We really want people to know that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but at the same time, that's just how people are. And again, you may be that person, you may know somebody like that, and I certainly am in some degree, so I'm not above this sort of thing. So anyway, so that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. I suspect that you did, and I want you guys to have some fun with the next project, right? Come up with some good examples. Maybe we can have a good laugh, right? Hit your friend or something, right? Or maybe even at your own expense if you're willing to put it out there. That's always great too. But anyway, have some fun with it, and I'll see you again soon. Great.